The plate made a soft sound as it landed in front of Helen. She looked down at what her daughter had served her. Half a chicken breast, trimmed of visible fat, 3 carrot sticks, and a small scoop of mashed potatoes. No gravy. Smaller portions are better for you now, Mom, said Diana with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We need to watch your sugar and salt intake. Helen glanced around the table. Her son-in-law Greg was cutting into his second helping of chicken. Her grandchildren, Tyler and Megan, passed a basket of warm dinner rolls between them without offering her any. No one seemed to notice or care about the difference in their plates and hers. Then came the little laugh from Greg. Your mom's got that wartime stomach anyway. 1 ration per day, right? He winked at Diana, who smiled. Helen picked up her fork and pushed the food around her plate. She said nothing, but something shifted inside her. It wasn't when the fork touched the plate or when Greg made his joke. It was the moment her own daughter had decided she was old, without saying the word, and her son-in-law had turned it into a joke. That night, after the dishwasher had finished its cycle and the house had gone quiet, Helen sat on her bedroom floor with a manila folder open beside her. The air still smelled of the rosemary she'd taught Diana to use when cooking chicken. Helen hadn't slept. Instead, she sorted through every paper she'd kept since selling her house, the one she'd shared with her late husband Robert for 35 years. She flipped carefully through bank statements, closing documents, wire transfer receipts. Then she pulled out the thick house contract, all 40 pages of it. She turned to page 7, paragraph 4. There it was in black and white. Title holder, Helen Margaret Wilson. Just her name. No co-owners. No co-signers. Just her. Helen leaned back against the bed and let out a slow breath. They'd made her feel like a guest in their home for 3 years now. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was in these papers. The truth was that she had paid for this house in full. Diana had asked her to sell the family home after Greg lost his job. It's for our future, she'd said. We'll all live together. You'll have your own suite. Privacy and equal say. That sounded like a good plan. Now, 3 years later, Helen couldn't remember the last time anyone knocked before walking into her space. Diana controlled the groceries. Greg had called her a budget drain during last month's financial discussion. The grandkids had started calling her room Grandma's Corner. Helen wasn't aging. She was disappearing. She stared at her name on the title for a long, quiet moment. The next morning, Diana rushed into the kitchen with her phone in one hand and coffee in the other. Mom, can you hurry up in the bathroom? Greg needs to get ready for his video interview. Helen nodded pleasantly. Of course. She ate breakfast at the counter alone, toast without butter because Diana was watching everyone's cholesterol. She watched Greg throw his laptop bag in the trunk and drive away without saying goodbye to anyone. But today, the sound of their car backing out of the driveway didn't bother her. Last night, she'd found something better than seconds at dinner. She'd found leverage. Diana scrolled through her phone, not looking up. By the way, you'll need to move your car to the street this weekend. Greg's got a delivery coming. My car? Helen asked, her voice mild. Yeah, we don't want it in the way when the furniture guys come. You don't mind, right? The word mind was a trap. Helen gave a small smile. Of course not. She didn't add what she was thinking. The driveway I paid for. The garage you filled. The house with my name on it. Helen went back to her room, carrying her tea carefully in both hands. Old habits from her 30 years as a teacher, carrying too much with too little help. She passed the hall photo of Diana and Greg in front of the house on moving day. Helen had taken that picture. Diana had posted it with homeowners at last. No mention of who made it possible. 3 years ago, she'd sat in a lawyer's office with Diana on one side and Greg nervously tapping his foot on the other. He just lost his job. Diana was pregnant with their second child. The plan had seemed reasonable then. Sell the house she'd shared with Robert, move everyone under one roof, start something new. The in-law suite would be hers, separate entrance, private bath, her own small garden. She'd have equal say. But equal turned out to be conditional. No one asked her opinion when Diana painted over the garden fence Helen had hand-stained. No one consulted her when her favorite rose bush was pulled up to make room for a grill Greg never used. The front porch light burned out 2 weeks ago. Helen replaced it herself. Nobody noticed. Even the word home had changed. Diana now said things like, "Mom lives with us," instead of, "We live together." Greg joked that Helen's suite was the add-on, even though it was part of the original floor plan. And when friends came over, tours included phrases like, "This is our space." "Oh, and that's Mom's room." Not their home. Just hers. Separate. Tolerated. Like a guest who'd stayed too long. And yet the mortgage had been hers from day one. The full down payment Helen's. She'd sold her husband's home in a good market, taken a quick offer, and wired the money herself. Diana and Greg hadn't qualified for the loan on their own. They'd needed her to close the deal. And they'd promised, that she'd never feel like an afterthought. A soft knock came at her door. "Hey, Mom," Diana said, poking her head in. "Make sure you're not using the washing machine around 4 tomorrow. Okay? I've got a call and the noise carries upstairs." Helen nodded. Of course. After Diana left, Helen pulled out a small notebook from her nightstand. She opened to a fresh page and wrote down the date in a single sentence. "They call it theirs, but the deed says different." Then she opened her tablet and tapped on a name in her contacts list that she hadn't used in years. Thomas Parker, Estate Law. The contact page loaded slowly, but the message went through. "Hi Thomas, it's Helen Wilson. I'd like to schedule a meeting about property rights and asset protection. I believe I'm still your client." She hit send, closed the notebook, and closed her eyes. Some titles came with salaries. Others came with deeds. The message had been sent, but Helen kept her movements normal. Nothing in how she carried herself showed the quiet plan forming in her mind. She continued her days as she had for years, polite, low-profile, disciplined. But now she noticed details she'd once let slide. The first one appeared on a Monday morning, taped to the refrigerator. A new kitchen and chore calendar with bright pastel blocks outlined in dry erase marker. At the top it read, "Family Harmony. Everyone helps." Each name had its own color. Greg in blue, Diana in pink, the kids in purple. Helen was green, supposedly fresh and vibrant. Under Monday next to her name, 5:30 p.m., dinner, low sodium, small portion, and 7 a.m., feed dog. Thursday, sweep porch, and transfer laundry. Helen looked at the board, coffee mug in hand, as if studying a report card. That evening, dinner was served at exactly 5:30. Diana set a plate in front of her while the rest of the family prepared to eat at 6. "Not too salty, I hope," Diana said brightly, walking away before Helen could answer. She didn't ask if Helen wanted to eat with them. She didn't wait to see if she wanted to. The salt comment wasn't random. 2 weeks ago, Helen had added a pinch more seasoning to the soup and mentioned it. Diana had immediately looked up high blood pressure risks over 65. And left a pamphlet about sodium intake on Helen's placemat the next morning. Since then, her meals had become medicinal, measured, clinical. The control spread to everything. Helen's seat on the sofa now had a special cushion that helped posture. Her TV shows were changed because the kids need calming programs before bed. Even her tea bags had been moved to a lower cabinet to make things easier. It wasn't care. It was containment. On Friday, Greg's mother came to visit. Susan arrived with 2 suitcases, pastries, and a laugh that filled the front hallway. Diana greeted her like royalty, hugging her with both arms, praising her new haircut, offering slippers and a robe. "Susan, I made your room up with those vanilla candles you love." That night, Helen heard them laughing over wine. Real wine, not the alcohol-free kind Helen was told to drink because of medication interactions. Susan got the plush guest towels. She got French toast the next morning with real maple syrup. Helen's own towel had frayed edges and a bleach mark from when Diana had cleaned the guest's bathroom and tossed it in with whites. By Sunday, Susan was featured in an Instagram post. "Weekend with my favorite woman. So blessed to have 2 moms, but this one taught me everything about family first." Helen wasn't tagged. Of course not. That evening, after everyone had gone upstairs, Helen stood in the kitchen staring at the calendar again, her name next to the 5:30 slot, green and polite. She reached for the marker, then stopped herself. Instead, she took out her phone and opened the Notes app. Day 1. Dinner served separately. Portion controlled. Salt monitored. She saved the note and tapped the little lock icon beside it. She would document everything quietly, like building a case she hadn't decided to use yet. That night, as she brushed her teeth, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her robe was worn but clean. Her face was tired but alert. There was no anger in her expression, only clarity. Let them schedule her. Let them control her down to teaspoons in TV time. She was counting too. And unlike them, she wasn't using dry erase markers. The next day, when Helen returned from grocery shopping, she barely set the bags down when Diana's voice carried from across the house. "Mom, did you buy cranberry juice?" Helen didn't answer right away. She was taking the receipt from her purse, folded neatly as always, and placing the bottle in the refrigerator door. "I did," she replied, her voice steady. "It was on sale." Diana appeared in the doorway, her forehead creased into that expression she'd started using more often. "I wish you'd told me first. We're trying to keep track of the budget this month. That's what the fridge calendar is for." Helen glanced at the color-coded meal and budget schedule pinned with fruit-shaped magnets. Tuesday was apparently almond milk smoothie day. "I didn't realize cranberry juice was forbidden," Helen said mildly. Diana sighed. "It's not that. It's just, it helps if you ask before buying extras or at least use the coupons. Some of the reward points expired because we forgot about them." Helen nodded once, walked to her room, and closed the door quietly. She didn't raise her voice or argue, but she did log into her online banking account. Then she pulled out the spreadsheet she'd kept on her old laptop. Monthly contributions, Diana and Greg at XLSX. Every check, every money transfer, every grocery run she'd paid for herself. $60 here, $100 there. She printed it all, sorted by date. Then she added another sheet. School donations, classroom parties, sports uniforms, tutoring fees, all from her account. Diana's voice filtered through the vent above. Something about needing a new swimsuit, asking Greg if black or navy looked better on her. Helen paused. Diana's phone was still on the counter from earlier. Notifications lit up the screen. A message preview from a group chat labeled, "Beach Weekend 2025. Diana booked the hotel. Ocean View 3 nights. We're doing this." Underneath, another message from someone named Jennifer. "Tell your mom thanks for the vacation fund." Helen stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she went back to her room and opened her email. She didn't write anything angry. She didn't attach any files. She just forwarded her contribution spreadsheet to herself and added her attorney's name in the CC field. In the subject line, she typed 2 words, "Financial review." That evening at dinner, Diana passed Helen a small plate with a single boiled potato. "No butter, no salt. We're watching our starches," she said with a wink. Helen thanked her, folded her napkin carefully and asked, "How's the swimsuit shopping going?" Diana blinked. "What?" "For the beach trip," Helen said evenly. "Black or navy?" The silence that followed made the room feel empty. Greg looked up from his phone. The kids froze mid-bite. Diana gave a forced laugh. "Oh, you saw that? It's just a little getaway with friends. Don't worry, it's covered." Helen didn't respond. She didn't have to. That night, she made her tea stronger, using 2 bags instead of 1. No one stopped her. Her phone buzzed at 10:14 p.m. Text from Thomas Parker. "Just reviewed your documents. You still legally control the house. Let's discuss options." Helen didn't smile. She reached for her reading glasses and sat quietly as the kitchen light hummed overhead. The house around her still moved to its own rhythm. Diana's humming from the laundry room. Greg's whistling as he walked down the hall. But something in the foundation had already shifted, this time in her direction. The next morning, Helen called Thomas Parker's office at exactly 9 a.m. "I'd like to file a formal 30-day notice to vacate," she said calmly. "2 tenants, no lease, property under my name alone." There was a pause, then a soft, impressed sound from the other end. "Mrs. Wilson," Thomas said, "I believe you're ready." She was. By Thursday afternoon, the document was finished. Clear, legal, airtight. Helen read it line by line at her kitchen table, highlighter in one hand, tea in the other. She didn't change a word. She didn't need to. The envelope was plain white. No drama. She placed it on the kitchen counter beneath a small glass paperweight shaped like a cardinal, right in the middle of the weekly dinner prep. Lasagna night. Diana's favorite. Dinner was busy that evening. Greg had opened a bottle of wine. The twins were louder than usual, tossing garlic bread across the table while Diana tried to keep order with tight smiles and quiet shushing. Helen sat in her usual seat, third chair from the left, within reach of the fridge calendar as always. Diana moved toward the counter to grab cheese when she saw the envelope. She picked it up absent-mindedly, opened it while still laughing and went still. The silence that followed wasn't immediate. It spread slowly like water across a table. Her fork made a small sound as it slid from her hand. "What is this?" Diana asked, her voice flat. Greg leaned over and read it, then laughed. "This is a joke, right? You're evicting us?" Diana stared, eyes wide, face flushing. "You're evicting your own daughter?" Helen looked at her directly. "Legally I can. Emotionally you already did." Greg pushed away from the table. "You'll regret this. You think people won't find out? That they won't talk." Helen folded her napkin with careful precision and placed it beside her plate. "Let them." Greg narrowed his eyes. "Fine, I'll take this public." Diana stood frozen. "You can't mean this. You can't." Helen rose from the table slowly, as calm as ever. 30 days, that's all." She walked back to her suite without another word. Inside, her hand trembled only once, just long enough to place her phone on the charger. The rest of the house stayed suspended in confused panic. She could hear Diana pacing in the hallway, whispering frantically into her phone, Greg slamming a cabinet door. The unmistakable sounds of people scrambling to regain control they thought they owned. Helen sipped her tea. She didn't feel angry. She felt awake. Greg's voice rose from the hallway. "You want a war? Fine." His voice was still echoing when Helen closed her door. She didn't slam it. She didn't lock it. She just let the wood settle back into the frame like a period at the end of a sentence. Quiet. Final. Clear. She heard the texting begin before she even sat down. The quick tapping, the notification sounds, Diana's voice rising and falling in whispers and gasps. The family group chat was coming alive like an animal poked too early, and Helen didn't even need to check her phone to know what would happen next. She just waited. At 8:42 p.m. her phone buzzed once, then again, then 10 more times. When she finally looked at it, the screen was filled with messages from the Wilson family chat. Diana, 8:01 p.m. Can someone explain how a 67-year-old kicks her family out? Diana, 8:03 p.m. I'm really worried. She's not well. This is just crazy. Cousin Mark. Wait, what's going on? Uncle Bill. Are you okay? Diana, 8:08 p.m. She's been acting strange, withdrawn, unpredictable. I'm honestly scared for her. Greg, 8:09 p.m. She called it reclaiming power. Honestly feels like elder rage. Helen looked at the screen. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she opened the photo album on her phone. Folder. Evidence. She selected the clearest image first. Her dinner from 3 nights ago. Half a chicken breast, a fork stuck in a single carrot. Timestamp included. Next, a photo of the fridge calendar. Her name highlighted in green with small portion, and low sodium written beside it. Then, a PDF attachment. Her contribution spreadsheet, listing every household expense she'd covered for 3 years. She dropped them all in the group thread. No caption. The typing indicator stopped. For a long time no one responded. Then, Cousin Mark, 8:24 p.m. Wow. Uncle Bill, 8:25 p.m. I didn't know about all this. Cousin Kate, 8:26 p.m. Diana, this isn't what you described. A few quiet exits followed. Aunt Margaret has left the chat. Then another. And another. Helen got up, refilled her teacup and walked to the window. The house was dark except for the hallway nightlight. She could hear Greg talking on the phone upstairs, pacing. Diana's footsteps passed her door and doubled back, like she was debating whether to knock. She didn't. Back in her chair, Helen found a new message, not in the group chat, but from her granddaughter, Megan. Megan, 8:44 p.m. Grandma, I don't know what to say. You're not wrong, just brave. Let me know if you need anything. Helen's fingers hovered over the keyboard before replying. Thank you. I've needed someone to say that for a while. 10 minutes later, she received a text from a cousin in Oregon. My mom always said you were the strong one. If anyone says otherwise, they're jealous. Stand your ground. And then silence again. At 9:18 p.m., a voicemail notification appeared. Diana. Helen tapped play, keeping the phone an inch from her ear. Hi, Mom. I don't know what's happening. I want to talk, okay? Not argue, just talk. Maybe we could work out something that makes everyone happy. Helen stopped the voicemail halfway through. She didn't need to hear the rest. She already knew the tone. It was the same one Diana used when calling customer service. Sweet, calculated, slightly condescending. She'd once heard her daughter use that voice to ask for a manager at a restaurant because they'd forgotten extra dressing. This wasn't about peace. It was about control. Helen opened her notes app and typed, Day 4. Group narrative attempted. Documentation succeeded. Next move coming. She folded the throw blanket over her lap, leaned back in her chair, and turned on the classical music station she used to fall asleep to when Robert was still alive. Violins played softly through the speaker, building into something tense but measured, exactly like her. The music had just faded when the soft knock came, too polite to be genuine. Pause, then another knock, this one firmer. Helen didn't answer right away. She let Diana stand there in the quiet, letting her shift her weight in uncertainty. Finally, she opened the door. Can we talk? Diana asked, hands folded like she was about to offer a blessing, not a plea. Helen stepped aside. You can talk. The room smelled of mint tea and hand lotion. Helen had lit a candle 20 minutes earlier, knowing this would happen, knowing that sooner or later the tone would shift from accusation to strategy. Diana sat on the edge of the armchair like it might bite her. She wore her weekend yoga outfit, but there was nothing relaxed about how she sat. Look, I know emotions are high, she began. But this whole eviction thing, it's extreme, Mom. Helen folded her hands calmly. Is that your opinion or Greg's? Diana blinked. It's mine. And the kids. This is really hard on them. Helen tilted her head. Were they worried about me when you stopped setting a place for me at dinner? That's not fair, Diana said quickly. You always eat early. You mean you manage me, Helen offered. Diana took a sharp breath. Mom, please. You're ruining everything we've built. Helen raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. You say we built it. I remember buying it. There was a moment, just one, where Diana looked like a child again. Cornered, outmatched, trying to wiggle free with charm that no longer worked. She leaned forward. I'm not here to fight. I'm asking for time. That's all. Just time. Helen didn't blink. You've had 3 years. This will hurt the kids, Diana snapped. Don't you care? Helen stood slowly, walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a small leather folder. From inside, she removed the same spreadsheet she'd sent to her attorney. She placed it gently on the coffee table between them. Numbers didn't yell. They didn't twist words. They just sat there solid. You're hurt, Helen said quietly. Started the moment you decided that being my daughter came with conditional gratitude. Diana's eyes filled with tears, but it wasn't sadness. It was frustration. Why are you doing this now? You've always been so accommodating. Helen smiled faintly. That's exactly why. Diana stood up fast. You're seriously choosing to destroy your family over a few dinners and a stupid trip? No, Helen replied, voice even. I'm choosing to stop pretending this is a family when it's been a transaction all along. Diana's mouth opened, then closed. Her shoulders dropped with disbelief, the kind that comes from realizing the old tricks no longer work. I'll call a lawyer, she muttered. You should, Helen said. That way they can explain the 30-day timeline. Diana stared at her, waiting for softening, for a crack, for a waver in her voice. None came. Please pack carefully, Helen said, standing. 30 days means 30. Diana didn't say goodbye. She left the room with the kind of quiet that only someone not used to losing could make. Helen closed the door gently behind her, then blew out the candle with a soft breath. The room went dark, but it felt brighter than it had in years. 2 mornings later, Greg didn't knock. He stormed down the hall, his aftershave arriving before his voice. The house echoed with anger as he reached Helen's door. We need to talk, he said, tone sharp, one hand still holding his phone like it gave him authority. Helen was buttering toast. She didn't jump. Greg continued without waiting. This eviction nonsense, it's not enforceable. I talked to a buddy who knows a guy at the bank. I'm applying for refinancing this week. You can't just throw us out of a house we've made payments on. Helen set her toast down. You've made payments? He blinked. Utilities, groceries, repairs. She wiped her hands on a napkin. So rent. His jaw tightened. I'm not getting into word games. That's fine, she said. The bank doesn't care about word games, just titles. And hers was still the only name on the deed. Greg left in a rush of movement, fingers already dialing. By noon, he had an appointment at First State Bank. By 3:30, he was pacing the parking lot, red-faced and humiliated. The banker had smiled kindly, then printed the property record from the county assessor's website. I'm sorry, Mr. Carson, she'd said. You can't refinance a home you don't legally own. Mrs. Wilson's name is listed as sole owner, and unless she adds you to the title or signs consent, this application goes nowhere. But I live there, Greg had insisted. Living somewhere doesn't make you the owner, she'd replied. Otherwise, apartment renters would own buildings. He'd left with an empty folder containing nothing but rejection. That night, Greg didn't come down for dinner. Helen noted the silence without surprise. Diana tiptoed around the kitchen like guilt had soaked into her slippers. The kids whispered too much, sensing a change even cartoons couldn't cover up. The next morning, Helen met with Thomas Parker again. This time she brought a copy of Greg's failed attempt. Her attorney read the email, then handed her a clean sheet titled Affidavit of Sole Ownership. He slid her a pen. Want to make this official? Helen nodded. It's time. She signed. With each stroke of ink, she didn't feel victorious. She felt validated. Thomas looked pleased. Once this is filed, it'll block any future attempts to claim interest in the house. If they try again, this becomes Exhibit A. The affidavit was filed with the county clerk the next day. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just legal, final, and clear. By Thursday, the ripples began. It started with a cousin, Nancy from Denver, who posted a vague comment about how money turns nice old ladies into tyrants. Then came the screenshot. It arrived in Helen's email from her niece Olivia. The subject line simply read, "Thought you should see this." Attached was a capture from a private Facebook post Diana had written. Only she forgot Nancy was still connected to Olivia. Boomers don't get it. They're sitting on wealth and throwing us out like trash. She acts like the house is hers, like we didn't help. Greedy, controlling, unstable. She's cutting herself off and one day she'll regret it. But fine, let her sit alone in her golden cage. Helen looked at the words without reaction. She didn't forward it to her lawyer. She didn't reply to Olivia. She just opened her phone notes and added, Day 29. My silence was mistaken for surrender. But I was busy filing the truth. Helen didn't respond to Diana's online tantrum. She didn't call Olivia to ask what others were saying. She didn't defend herself or send screenshots to clear her name. She simply read the messages twice, once as a mother and again as a woman who had finally stopped mistaking quiet for peace. Then she closed the email, stood slowly from her chair, and reached for the folder she hadn't opened in 2 years. Estate and End of Life, Confidential. Once it had been kept in a fireproof box under her bed, tucked beside old passports and faded photos from her wedding day. Now it sat beside her coffee press and the half-finished banana bread she'd baked that morning. Only one slice was missing. She'd eaten it deliberately, not from hunger but clarity. Every bite had tasted like something she had almost forgotten. Ownership. There had been a time years ago when Helen assumed Diana would handle everything after she died. It was the natural order, wasn't it? The child buries the parent, carries the family name, holds the family stories. But that was before Diana took a knife to more than just a chicken breast. She drove herself to her attorney's office, the same one where she'd signed the purchase contract for the house, where Diana had once held her hand and called her brave for putting her name on the dotted line. Helen saw that moment now for what it really was, not trust but convenience. The office smelled faintly of wood polish and copy machines. Helen sat in the same leather chair, its corners worn, its presence familiar. Thomas Wilson greeted her with a respectful nod. Mrs. Wilson, or may I call you Helen? Helen is fine, she said, sitting straighter. Let's not waste time today. He opened her file. We've already filed the affidavit on the house. Diana and Greg can't touch it. Not now, not later. What would you like to do next? Helen pulled a sealed envelope from her bag and slid it across the desk. Update the will, effective immediately. He raised an eyebrow. Diana and Greg removed, she said firmly. No partial shares, no conditions. New beneficiary. Without hesitation. Megan Wilson Carson, granddaughter, 19, honest, kind, knows how to listen. Thomas glanced at her, then wrote down the name. Full estate transfer? Yes. Assets, property, accounts. He flipped to a clean form. And if Megan declines the inheritance? Helen folded her hands. Donate everything, preferably to a foundation that supports women over 60, especially those pushed out by family. Thomas's pen paused, then continued. Specific organization? I'll research it this week. For now, just write it as a directive. The document took 25 minutes to draft. The language was cold, legal, final. Diana and Greg's names appeared only once under the heading Former Beneficiaries. Helen initialed every page. She didn't pause, not even on the signature line. The pen moved smoothly. No shaking. Thomas slid the file into a clear sleeve. You'll need a witness signature. Someone independent, ideally. I've got someone, Helen said. She shows up when it matters. That evening, Helen called Megan. The phone rang twice. Grandma, Megan answered, bright and open. I have a question for you, Helen said gently. A personal one. Sure. If you were ever left something unexpectedly, would you take care of it or sell it? Megan paused. Depends. Is it a car or a cat? Helen laughed. It's not alive. Then I'd take care of it, Megan said. Unless it was haunted or falling apart. No ghosts, Helen replied. Just a garden and a chapter worth continuing. Is everything okay? Helen looked around her kitchen, quiet, neat. No one scheduling her meals or counting her salt. I'm just clearing the books, she said. Figuring out where my story ends and where it gets handed off. After they hung up, she opened her laptop and wrote one email. Subject: Want to talk about the house body? Let me tell you a story they didn't think I'd write. She hit send. Outside, the wind moved through the bushes. Somewhere behind her, a door creaked and settled into silence. She poured herself a glass of water, took a sip, and watched her reflection blur in the microwave door. She didn't feel mean. She felt exact. The email had been sent. Simple, direct, clear. Helen didn't wait for Megan to reply that night. She didn't need confirmation to know the story was changing. The next morning, she poured her coffee and sat at the table like she had every other day. But this time there was no pretending. The kitchen calendar still said Helen desk shelves. But the balance had already shifted. Not on paper, in the air. She'd written her name into the next chapter. Now she was ready to fix the margins. Diana, meanwhile, was busy creating a different version, weaving it through whispers at church functions and school meetings like it was truth written in gold. At Sunday service, Helen felt the glances, longer than friendly, shorter than direct. Quick handshakes, shallow smiles. One woman patted her wrist and said, "Families get complicated sometimes, don't they?" That was the first warning. By Monday, Helen overheard two PTA mothers in the community center discussing what a shame it was, how quickly older people can change when they feel pushed aside. One of them was sorting fundraiser envelopes Helen herself had stamped last fall. They stopped talking when she walked by like teenagers caught sneaking out. Diana had always been clever with words. She didn't lie directly. She didn't need to. She used phrases like "my mother's decline" and "the emotional strain," and "we're just trying to keep her safe." They were easier to spread than truth. They sounded caring even as they erased her. Helen didn't fight back with anger. She fought with evidence. On Wednesday morning, she printed 4 documents. 1. The notarized deed in her name. 2. The updated will. 3. A spreadsheet of her financial contributions since moving in. And 4. The original living agreement, signed by Diana and Greg, acknowledging Helen's right to end their stay. She slid them into a simple gray folder and hand-delivered it to the church office and the PTA president's mailbox. No note, no explanation, just paper. Just truth. Later that day, Helen walked into the grocery store and saw Jennifer, the PDA treasurer, standing in the produce section, frozen between apples and bagged lettuce. Her eyes widened. "Helen," she said awkwardly, clutching her cart. "I didn't know you were still helping with the spring fundraiser." "I didn't know I'd stopped," Helen replied, selecting 2 pears. Jennifer flushed. "I think there's been some confusion." "There's always confusion when facts arrive uninvited," Helen said, then smiled gently. "But truth doesn't need an introduction." The next morning, an email arrived from a PDA board member named Lisa Johnson. Subject: Private request body. "Hi Helen. Several of us reviewed your documents. Thank you for your transparency. We believe your experience, perspective, and contributions would make you an incredible asset. Would you consider joining the board next semester?" Helen read it twice, then once more aloud. She closed her laptop without replying right away. Not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to savor the reversal, not as revenge as restoration. That evening Diana knocked on her door, but didn't wait for a reply before walking in. She held her phone up like evidence. "Did you seriously give the PDA our personal documents?" Helen didn't look up from the bread she was slicing. "I gave them mine. They're practically worshipping you now. Is that what you wanted?" "I wanted the truth in the room where it belonged." Diana's voice cracked. "You're burning bridges." "No," Helen said, wiping the knife clean. "I'm removing scaffolding. There's a difference." She didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Helen didn't answer Diana's last accusation. She had finished slicing the bread, wiped the blade clean, and turned her back to the doorway. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was chosen deliberate. Diana stood there for another breath, expecting rebuttal. It didn't come, so she turned and left barefoot and wordless. The air that lingered behind her felt like a removed bandage, exposed and faintly stinging. Helen set the final slice onto wax paper and folded it gently. One for Megan for later. By morning, the kitchen smelled of toast and coffee, not because Diana cooked, but because Helen had decided it was a day for real food made on her own terms. The radio played softly from the windowsill, something from the 60s, a song that knew when to pause. Diana shuffled in around 8:15, still in her robe, still too quiet for someone who usually filled the room with tasks and schedules before the coffee finished brewing. Helen didn't greet her. She cracked an egg into a warm pan. "One, not two. Just one." "I thought maybe we could talk," Diana said, brushing hair behind her ear. "You've been doing a lot of that," Helen replied. "Just not to me." Diana hovered, unsettled. She watched the egg cook but didn't ask for any. Helen plated her egg with a single piece of buttered toast. She sat at the breakfast nook, the small 2-person table by the window where she used to do crosswords, and began to eat in silence. Diana finally pulled out the chair across from her. "You're really going through with it." Helen took a sip of coffee. "The paperwork says so. We have the kids. This isn't a simple process." "It wasn't simple when you cut my dinner portions down to slivers." Diana's mouth tightened. "You know, I didn't mean anything by that." "You meant everything," Helen said. "You just didn't think it would cost you anything." She stood up, walked to the printer by her desk, and pulled a freshly printed document from the tray. She returned to the table and placed it down between them. It was a sheriff-assisted notice of enforcement, prepared, notarized, and set to activate if Diana and Greg refused to leave by the deadline. "Just in case," Helen said. "I don't want confusion." Diana stared at the document like it might disappear if she looked away. "We're not criminals." "No," Helen said. "You're just tenants who forgot I wasn't a tenant too." Diana's eyes welled. She didn't hide it. "You're choosing strangers over your own daughter." Helen paused, the insult sinking in like a stone in water. "No," she said. "I'm choosing someone who remembers I'm still a person." She picked up her plate, rinsed it clean, and set it in the drying rack. Behind her she heard Diana's sob, quiet at first, then louder, uncontrolled. Helen didn't turn around. She dried her hands on a dish towel, folded it, and set it aside. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt clear. It wasn't the cry of someone losing a home. It was the cry of someone losing a story they thought they'd never have to change. Helen stepped toward the hallway. 30 days means 30, she said. "Please pack respectfully." Diana didn't answer, not with words, just with the sound of her own surprise. That afternoon, Helen sat in her sunlit bedroom with a lined notepad in her lap, the same kind she'd used during her teaching years to record observations when students weren't looking. Except now the subject was her own history. She wrote, "Dear Helen, you stayed quiet long enough to keep the house warm, the fridge full, the towels folded. You gave them your savings, your weekends, your advice. And they still decided your presence was clutter. You aren't angry. You're whole. Whole with memory, whole with knowing, whole with things that can't be measured by someone else's schedule or serving size." Her pen paused at that line. She thought of the calendar on the fridge, her name reduced to a green marker and dietary notes, thought of Susan being offered the good coffee and fresh sheets while she was told which chair had the most back support. She had gone from mother to margin. Her phone buzzed beside her. "Megan. Hey Grandma. I wanted to tell you something before Mom does." Helen braced. "Go ahead." "I found them a short-term rental," Megan said. "It's outside town but it's clean, has furniture, and the landlord's okay with them staying more than 30 days if they don't cause problems." "You did that?" Helen asked, her voice softer than she expected. "I didn't do it for them," Megan said. "I did it for you so you wouldn't feel guilty into changing your mind about what's right." Helen didn't speak right away. The quiet on the line was warm. Megan broke it. "You always made sure I had a place at the table, even when the table was plastic and the chairs were folding. That matters, and you don't owe them for forgetting it." Helen pressed her hand to her chest, not to calm herself, just to feel her own heart still beating, still present. "Thank you," she said. "That's the kindest thing anyone's done for me in years." After they hung up, she stepped out into the backyard with her tea. The sun was low, cutting shadows through the maple leaves. She walked the edge of the garden, checking the spots where her flowers had either bloomed stubbornly or given up entirely. It was all symbolic now. Every patch of soil said something. She didn't expect the phone to ring again so soon. Unknown caller, local area code. She answered. "Is this Helen Wilson?" "Yes, this is she." "Helen, this is Carol Martin. I used to live across from you on Oak Street. I heard you might be looking for someone to rent part of your place." Helen blinked. "Well, yes, I suppose I am." Carol continued. "I'm back in town. Just me now. Looking for something quiet near the community center. I remembered how beautiful your porch was and thought maybe." Helen looked at the porch now, empty but sunlit. For years it had been a space she wasn't welcome to enjoy, filled with Diana's exercise mats or Greg's weekend coolers. Now someone wanted to return to it. Someone who remembered it fondly. "I think that could work," Helen said. "Would you like to see it this week?" "I'd love that." "I'll be here," Helen said, her voice clearer than it had been in months. She ended the call and walked slowly inside, passing through the kitchen, the scene of the final egg, the half-heard sob, the power shift dressed as breakfast. And in that room once more the air smelled like butter. The next morning the porch was quiet when Helen opened the curtains. Not silent, just peaceful, the kind of quiet that came after a storm clears, after the thunder has moved on, the kind that left only clean air behind. She stood for a moment watching the driveway, the gravel still marked from where Greg's car had sat too many times. The air was fresh with the scent of morning soil and the faint trace of soap from last night's hurried cleaning. It was moving day. No hugs, no photos, no boxes labeled with hearts or memories. Just black garbage bags, rolled rugs, a mattress half wrapped in plastic, leaning against the wall like an afterthought. Greg had started loading the truck at 7:10 a.m., arms stiff, mouth tight. Diana hadn't looked at Helen once when she passed by the kitchen. Not when she unplugged the coffee maker. Not when she packed the shared blender Helen had bought on sale last year. At 8:20, Diana finally broke the silence. "You'll regret this," she said, arms crossed, keys dangling from one finger. Helen looked up from her tea. "I already regret not doing it sooner." Diana's nostrils flared. "You've made yourself very clear. Congratulations on winning your house back. I hope you enjoy the quiet." Greg came in then, arms full of electronics. "You ready?" he asked Diana, eyes avoiding Helen. "I've been ready," she muttered. Then she turned, paused at the doorway and added, "I won't speak to you again." Helen didn't flinch. "Then we finally agree on something." The front door closed. Not slammed. Worse. It clicked. Quiet. Final like a vault locking. Helen didn't follow them outside. She waited until the engine started and the truck rolled down the street. She listened as the tires crunched gravel, fading away until they were just an echo at the curb. Then she stood. She moved through the house slowly, not out of sadness but care, as though the air hadn't caught up to the change yet. The walls still held the echo of voices. The baseboard still remembered where backpacks had been dropped, where laundry baskets sat too long. The guest room looked like a hotel after a hasty checkout. Sheets pulled off, closet door swinging open. A ring of dust outlined where a nightstand had been. A lone sock lay curled near the heating vent like it had tried to hide and been forgotten. Helen ran her hand along the windowsill. The paint was chipped beneath the curtain rod. She'd once sat there reading, the sun pouring in while she drank coffee on her own terms. It had been hers then. Now somehow it was hers again. In the bathroom she opened the cabinet and found 2 nearly empty bottles of her shampoo, used but never replaced. A sliver of her soap sat in the corner, dry and curled like it had given up trying. She walked back into the hall, then paused at the door to the garage. The trash bin was already full. Plastic bags, crumpled papers, a pair of broken headphones. She opened the lid. Right on top, bent and splayed open at the spine, was her old blue recipe book. The one with handwritten notes in the margins. Her mother's apple pie recipe in faded black ink. Robert's chili recipe complete with the scribbled note. More cumin. Trust me. The back page was torn. It had been tossed like junk mail. Helen stared down at it, her throat tightening not with grief but something denser. Something that tasted like confirmation. She didn't reach for it. The trash lid shut with a soft thump, but the sound lingered in Helen's ribs like an echo with something to say. She stood there for a moment longer, hands still resting on the edge, eyes fixed on the silent garage, half expecting a voice, maybe an apology, to call out behind her. But nothing came. No more negotiations, no more clipped comments, just the hollow quiet of a house that had finally exhaled. She turned, walked back inside and locked the back door, not because she had to, but because she could. The kitchen was still warm from the afternoon sun, golden light pooling in front of the sink. Helen opened the refrigerator. It was nearly empty, deliberately so. No meal prep containers labeled "no salt." No almond milk someone else bought but never finished. Just things she liked. A block of sharp cheddar. 2 ripe tomatoes. A bottle of Chardonnay chilled just right. And a loaf of fresh bread she'd picked up that morning without anyone asking why. She moved without rushing, without oversight. She sliced the bread thick, layered it with cheese, tomatoes, and fresh basil from her small garden out back. A drizzle of olive oil, a sprinkle of black pepper. She turned on the stove and let the sandwich sizzle in the pan, butter browning the edges to a golden crisp. The smell filled the kitchen, rich, savory, alive. Smelled like freedom. For the first time in 3 years she set the table for one. Cloth napkin folded just so. Her mother's blue-rimmed plate, the good silverware. Then she poured a full glass of wine. Not half a glass out of caution, not a sip out of politeness. A full pour. The sound of the bottle was music. She sat and ate. No one asked her to hurry. No one took her plate before she finished. No one told her what was better for her heart. It was just her, and it was enough. Every bite felt like a reclaiming. Every sip a promise to herself. She didn't rush the meal. She didn't check her phone. She let silence sit beside her like an old friend. Not a punishment. When she finished, she washed her plate carefully, dried it with the soft towel she liked, the one with embroidered sunflowers. Then she lit a small candle in the window. As she passed the hall, she glanced into the former guest room, now empty, still echoing. A box sat in the corner, her blue recipe book, rescued from the trash before garbage day. She hadn't opened it yet. She would in time. The house no longer whispered what it owed her. It simply listened. She was refilling her wine glass when the knock came. 3 gentle taps, then a pause. She opened the door. There stood Megan, wearing a university sweatshirt and holding a foil-covered plate that smelled of cinnamon and sugar. "Dinner looked lonely," Megan said, smiling. "So I brought dessert." Helen blinked, surprised not by the visit but by the timing. She stepped aside without a word. Megan walked in, set the plate on the counter and peeled back the foil. "Homemade snickerdoodles." A little uneven, slightly too dark on the edges, but soft in the center. I made them for study group, Megan said. But it got canceled. Thought you might like one. Helen reached for a cookie, broke it in half and handed the larger piece to Megan. They stood there in the kitchen light. No scripts, no roles, just warmth and sweetness between them. You doing okay, Grandma? Megan asked softly. Helen nodded once. Better than I expected. Megan smiled, and in that smile, Helen saw something that had nothing to do with obligation, just choice. She sat with Megan until the candle burned halfway down, the light casting shadows across the walls like gentle brushstrokes. The quiet didn't hurt anymore. Felt like belonging. In the days that followed, a rhythm emerged. Not forced, not planned, just natural. Megan started coming over on weekends. Sometimes with homework, sometimes with laundry, sometimes just with time. She never asked permission. She simply arrived and made herself useful without making herself central. She'd water the plants without being told, leave notes on the counter with reminders like, "Buy honey, not the fake stuff," or "Library books due Thursday." They drank coffee together in the morning sun, feet in slippers, the newspaper open between them. Megan never mentioned the past months. She didn't need to. She was watching the aftermath bloom in real time. One Sunday, Megan looked up from her tea. "What happens to the house when you're gone?" Helen glanced at her over her reading glasses. "Why, are you planning to speed things up?" Megan laughed, a real laugh. "No, I just meant it's beautiful, and I think it should keep being lived in like this." Helen nodded slowly, the corner of her mouth lifting. "It will. I made sure of that." Later that night, Helen reopened her journal, the one that hadn't seen ink since the eviction notice was delivered. The leather still smelled of cedar and thyme. She flipped to a fresh page and began writing in her steady hand. "This home was built with patience. I reclaimed it with purpose. I didn't burn bridges. I cleared the path. I gave myself back the dignity no one should have had the power to ration." She paused, then added, "Some stories end with silence. Mine ends with a full table." By the end of the week, invitations had been delivered. Handwritten, one per household. Not an email blast, not a text group, just cream-colored cards with pressed flower stickers addressed to the neighbors who had waved politely through the awkward months, who had seen her tending roses even when no one came out to help, who had walked their dogs past her driveway without ever asking what the real story was. Dinner at Helen's, Sunday 6 p.m. Bring nothing but conversation. She spent Saturday preparing, not with anxiety, with intention. The table was set with real linens, her wedding silver, and the ceramic dishes she'd packed in newspaper when she moved in. Music played softly, Ella Fitzgerald warm and flowing. A pot roast slow-cooked all day. Green beans with almonds. Her mother's cornbread recipe, not reduced in salt or butter, and dessert. An apple tart Megan had insisted on baking herself. Crust uneven but honest. By 6 o'clock the doorbell rang, then again, then again. Neighbors arrived, some with wine despite her instructions, some with awkward smiles. They didn't know what to expect. But when they stepped into Helen's kitchen, when they saw the table, long, bright, unapologetically full, they relaxed. "I've lived on this street for 7 years and never been inside," one woman said. Helen smiled. "Tonight's a good night to change that." They ate. They laughed. They passed dishes without commentary. No one measured portions. No one told her what she needed less of. At one point, someone raised a glass in a clumsy toast. To Helen, who reminds us that boundaries and kindness aren't enemies. She raised her glass in return. And to second helpings. The meal stretched for hours, the kind that flows from evening to night without anyone checking the time. Megan sat beside her, quiet, watchful, protective in the way only someone who's seen someone else disrespected can be. She leaned in during a pause and whispered, "I think Grandpa would have loved this." Helen didn't answer right away. She simply reached for the gravy boat and said, "Then have some more." By 9:30, the house was quiet again. The dishes stacked but not rushed. The leftover tart carefully covered for tomorrow. Helen walked to the living room and sat in her favorite chair. The one Diana had once said, didn't match the aesthetic. She looked around at the space, still warm from stories and candlelight. She pulled out her journal once more. No ceremony, just one last line. "They gave me half a plate. I gave them a full consequence." And this time she didn't just close the journal. She shelved it, not because the story was over, but because it had finally been told. The next morning, Carol Martin came to see the room. She arrived precisely at 10, wearing sensible shoes and carrying a small notebook. Her gray hair was cut in a neat bob, and she had the same direct gaze Helen remembered from neighborhood meetings years ago. "You've kept it beautiful," Carol said, walking through the living room. "It feels peaceful." Helen showed her the guest suite, now cleared of shadows and dust. Fresh paint on the walls, a soft cream she'd chosen herself. New curtains that let in more light. "The bathroom's private," Helen explained. "And you'd have access to the kitchen, of course." Carol nodded, writing something in her notebook. "What about garden access? I remember you had quite the green thumb." "The garden's meant to be enjoyed," Helen said simply. "I'm not much for rules about shared spaces anymore." They settled on terms over tea. A fair rent. A 6-month agreement to start. Respect for quiet hours. Simple, clear, equal. Carol would move in next week. "I'm glad it's you," Helen said as they shook hands. "Someone who remembers what this place was before. And what it can be again," Carol added. After Carol left, Helen walked through each room slowly, not to check for flaws but to feel the difference. The house had stopped holding its breath. The walls seemed to stand straighter. The windows let in more light somehow, though she hadn't washed them. She paused in the doorway of what would soon be Carol's room. The space held possibility now, not history. She'd moved the bed against a different wall. She'd added a reading lamp by the window. Small changes that said, "This is not the same place you lost. This is somewhere new you're building." Her phone rang just as she finished making her shopping list. It was Thomas Parker. "Helen, just calling to let you know the paperwork is complete. The will has been properly witnessed and filed. It's official." "Thank you, Thomas. I also wanted to tell you that your story has been making rounds. Not the gossip version, the real one. 2 clients have asked me about property protection after hearing about your situation." Helen didn't ask who they were. She didn't need to know. "I hope they find their voice sooner than I did." "Well, your voice has quite the echo now." After they hung up, Helen checked her email. 3 new messages. One from the PDA confirming her board position starting next month. One from Carol with paint chip samples for the room, if you're open to a slight color change. And one from someone unexpected. Sophie, Diana's oldest friend. Subject: "I've known for years, Body." "Helen, I should have said something long ago. The way they treated you at gatherings, always speaking over you, always making decisions about your food and schedule, I saw it. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. That was wrong of me. You deserved better than half a life in your own home. I'm sorry." Helen read it twice. She didn't reply right away. Some acknowledgments needed to sit a while, to be felt before being answered. Instead, she opened a different document on her computer. Senior Women's Housing Cooperative Proposal. She'd been working on it for 3 days, ever since her first conversation with Carol. The idea had come to her during dinner with the neighbors when Mrs. Chun mentioned her sister was also looking for a place with dignity but not isolation. The proposal was simple. Convert part of the large house into 2 more private suites. Create a small community of women over 60 who wanted independence without loneliness. Share meals twice a week. Split garden duties. Support each other's interests without erasing them. As she typed, the afternoon sun shifted through the kitchen windows, lighting different corners of the room in turn. The space felt expansive now, malleable. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was becoming a statement. Her phone chimed with a text from Megan. "Just finished finals. Can I come for dinner Friday? Found an amazing recipe for stuffed peppers." Helen smiled. "Yes, and bring your appetite. No half portions in this house." She set her phone down and walked out to the garden. The rose bush she'd planted last week was already showing new growth, tiny green shoots reaching up from dark soil. She knelt and gently cleared some weeds from around its base. Not all fresh starts were dramatic. Some were just quiet renewals, patient and determined. Back inside, she opened her mother's recipe book, the one rescued from the trash. The spine was still bent, but the pages held firm. She found the recipe she wanted. Robert's favorite apple cake. Extra cinnamon. Real butter. Serve warm. The note read in her own handwriting from years ago, "And never apologize for seconds." She gathered the ingredients, measuring with care but not caution. The kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and baking apples. This time she didn't check the clock. She didn't worry who might walk in and comment on the sugar content. She just created, tasting as she went, adjusting to her own preferences. When the cake was cooling on the rack, she set the table. One plate centered perfectly. One glass filled generously. One napkin folded with precision. The simplicity wasn't lonely. It was intentional. The next morning, Helen met Carol and the property manager to sign the rental agreement. The papers were straightforward, fair to both sides. As they signed, Helen noticed her hand was steady. No tremor, no hesitation. Just clear, deliberate strokes like she was signing her name back into existence. "I think this arrangement will work beautifully," the property manager said. "I know it will," Helen replied. "We're both clear on what we're agreeing to." That afternoon, 2 more emails arrived asking about potential rooms. Word had spread through Carol's church group. Helen started a waiting list just in case. Just an idea. 1 week later, Carol moved in with 2 suitcases, a bookshelf, and a bird feeder she asked permission to hang on the porch. "The cardinals around here are magnificent," she explained. Helen helped her arrange her books, and they shared tea afterward, sitting on the porch swing where Diana used to store her yoga equipment. The conversation flowed easily between them, 2 women who understood the value of earned space. "I was sorry to hear about the situation with your daughter," Carol said carefully. Helen sipped her tea. "It wasn't about losing a daughter. It was about finding myself." Carol nodded. Some truths didn't need elaboration. That evening, Megan came for dinner, bringing the promised stuffed peppers and a friend from her economics class. The kitchen filled with new voices, new laughter. Helen watched them from the doorway for a moment. Young women chopping vegetables, Carol setting the table, everyone moving around each other with respect for space and contribution. When they sat down to eat, Helen noticed something. For the first time in years, every place setting was identical. Same plates, same portions, same opportunity to ask for more. As she passed the bread basket, the one Diana had always kept just out of her reach, Helen caught her reflection in the window glass. She looked settled. Not younger, not older, just present. The woman looking back at her wasn't a ghost in her own home anymore. "More wine, Helen?" Carol asked, holding up the bottle. "Yes," Helen said, extending her glass. "A full pour, please." Outside, the cardinals found the new feeder, bright red against the evening green. Inside, women of 3 generations passed dishes around a table that had finally found its purpose, to hold more, not less. Helen took her place at the head of the table, not tucked away at the side, not served separately, centered, seen, full-plated.